Some people think they can judge others just by looking at them. But what happens when they misjudge the wrong person? Drop a comment below and let us know if you've ever been in a situation where someone assumed the worst about you. What did you do? Taryn Brooks stepped into the high-end boutique, her sneakers pressing softly against the polished marble floors. The store was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only came with overpriced goods and the unspoken rule that if you had to ask for the price, you couldn't afford it. She knew exactly what kind of place this was, the kind where they sized you up before even greeting you. And from the way the blonde-haired employee at the counter barely lifted his head, she could already feel it. She wasn't welcome here. Taryn had been through this a million times before. The long stares, the judgmental side eyes, the fake smiles that barely covered the suspicion underneath. Dressed in jeans and a hoodie, she wasn't exactly dripping in luxury, but she wasn't sloppy either, just comfortable. Still, in a place like this, comfort didn't count. Labels did. The employee sighed dramatically before finally dragging himself from behind the sleek white counter. He looked her up and down, unimpressed. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Taryn nodded, unfazed. "Yeah, I need a—" "You sure you're in the right place?" he cut in, smirking. "This isn't exactly a thrift store." There it was. The assumption. The insult wrapped in a joke. He didn't even try to hide it. Taryn exhaled through her nose, pressing her tongue against her cheek. She could already tell where this was going, but she wasn't about to let some minimum-wage gatekeeper ruin her day. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied coolly. The employee scoffed but plastered on a fake smile. "Okay, what are you looking for?" Taryn didn't even blink. A problem, apparently. A flicker of irritation flashed across his face, but he caught himself. He straightened his posture as if reminding himself that he was in control here. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but this is a luxury store," he said, folding his arms. "We don't really have anything in the lower price range." Taryn tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You don't even know what I'm looking for." The employee let out a dry chuckle. "Come on, we both know how this goes." He gestured vaguely at her outfit. "People like you come in, look around, take a few pictures for Instagram, and leave when you realize everything costs more than your rent." Taryn's jaw clenched, but she didn't let the anger show. "People like you." The phrase echoed in her mind, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Interesting," she mused, tucking her hands into her pockets. "So you're saying you already know what I can and can't afford?" The employee shrugged. "It's kind of obvious, isn't it?" She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that came with warmth. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that meant he had no idea who he was talking to. Before she could respond, another customer, a well-dressed woman dripping in designer brands, stepped into the store. Instantly, the employee's entire demeanor changed. "Welcome to Valency," he greeted her, his voice suddenly smooth and polite. "Let me know if you need any assistance." Taryn almost laughed. The switch-up was insane. She watched as he practically tripped over himself to cater to the new customer, leaving her standing there like an afterthought, as if she was invisible. Fine. If that's how he wanted to play it, she'd let him. For now. Instead of making a scene, she took her time browsing the store, letting her fingers run across the expensive fabrics, the handbags, the watches displayed behind thick glass. She saw the way the employee kept side-eyeing her, waiting for her to touch something she wasn't supposed to. He wanted her to slip up, to give him a reason. But she wouldn't. Minutes passed, and the other customer eventually left, satisfied with her purchase. Taryn, still unfazed, made her way back to the counter. The employee barely looked at her. "Done window shopping?" Taryn smirked. "Not quite." She reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. The employee sighed loudly, already assuming she was about to take pictures of the store to show her followers. "Yeah, we don't allow photography in here." But before he could finish, Taryn tapped her screen, placing a call. The moment the person on the other end picked up, her entire energy shifted. "Yeah, it's me," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "I need you to come down to Valency now." The employee frowned. "Excuse me?" Taryn held up a finger, silencing him. She was still on the phone, and from the way she spoke, whoever she called was important. The employee swallowed, suddenly unsure of himself. "Who are you calling?" Taryn smiled again, but this time there was nothing friendly about it. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because less than 10 minutes later, the boutique's glass doors swung open, and 3 men in all-white police uniforms strode inside with purpose. The employee froze. His smirk was gone. And just like that, everything changed. The moment the glass doors swung open, the entire energy in the boutique shifted. 3 uniformed officers, dressed in pristine white, stepped inside with authority. Their presence alone sucked the air from the room. The blonde-haired employee, who had been so smug just moments ago, stiffened, his eyes darting from the officers to Turan, confusion flickering across his face. Something was wrong. He had called no one. He hadn't hit any silent alarms. There was no incident that required law enforcement. Yet here they were. And worse, they weren't looking at him. They were looking at her. Turan stood exactly where she had been, arms crossed casually, phone still in hand. There was no panic in her expression. No nervous shuffling. No stammering to explain why she had called in actual officers to a simple boutique. If anything, she looked like she was waiting. The first officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes, stopped just a few feet away. He gave her a small nod. "Miss Brooks." The blonde-haired employee blinked, his mouth parted slightly. "Miss Brooks." Turan finally moved. She turned her head toward the officer, her lips pulling into a smirk. Right on time. Employee felt something tighten in his chest. A strange, creeping sensation slithered into his stomach, twisting into knots. He was missing something, something big. The second officer, a woman with neatly tied-back hair, glanced at the employee for the briefest moment before her gaze snapped back to Turan. "Everything all right, ma'am?" The way she said it, "ma'am," like she mattered, like she was someone of importance, sent a jolt of pure unease through the employee's veins. His mouth felt dry. What? What's going on?" Turan ignored him. She took a step forward, the officers moving just slightly to accommodate her movement. She wasn't hesitant. She wasn't questioning their presence. She wasn't scared. No, this was something else. The employee swallowed, forcing out a laugh. It sounded weak. Unsure. "Wait, are you in trouble or something?" Turan finally looked at him, and that was when he felt it. The shift. The silent, undeniable shift in power. Moments ago, he had been the one with control. The one with the smug smile, the dismissive attitude, the one who had made her feel small, like she didn't belong. But now he felt small. Now he felt like he was the one who had stepped into the wrong place. Turan exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "You know," she started, tapping her fingers against her phone, "I always find it funny when people like you make snap judgments." The employee flinched. He knew exactly what she meant by people like you. Turan took another slow step forward, closing the distance between them. "You took one look at me, decided who I was, what I could afford, how much I mattered, without even asking my name." She let the words hang in the air. Sharp. Cutting. The employee opened his mouth, scrambling for some excuse, some way to brush this off, but nothing came out. Turan tilted her head, her smirk growing. "That's the thing about assuming, though." She turned to the officers. "Captain Richards." The first officer nodded. The employee's stomach dropped. "Captain. Not just a cop. Not security. A captain." The other 2 officers remained silent, standing firm. They weren't moving against her. They weren't there to escort her out. They were there because she had called them. The employee stammered, finally managing to choke out a confused, I don't understand." Turan chuckled. A soft, knowing sound. "Oh, I'm sure you don't." The first officer, Captain Richards, spoke now, his voice level, unreadable. "We received a direct call from Miss Brooks regarding a situation at this location." "Miss Brooks." Again, the employee's head spun. "I think there's a misunderstanding," he tried. She came in, and I mean, look, we get a lot of people who." He stopped himself, realizing how bad that sounded. Turan arched a brow. "Go on." The officer's gazes hardened. "Mr. Jensen," Captain Richards said. The employee snapped his head toward the captain. "Why, yeah. You work here, correct?" Yeah, of course. But I don't understand why this is happening. Captain Richards didn't blink. "How long have you been employed here?" The employee licked his lips. 2 years." The second officer finally spoke. "Are you aware of who Miss Brooks is?" The employee frowned. He stopped. Because he didn't know. He had never bothered to ask. Turan's smirk widened just a fraction. "This is the best part," she mused. The employee swallowed thickly. She's your boss," the captain stated flatly. Silence. The words slammed into the employee like a freight train. Turan gave a slow nod. "That's right," she said. "I own this store. This entire franchise, actually." The air vanished from the room. The employee's mind shattered. His mouth opened, but his voice barely escaped. You what? Turan clicked her tongue. Should have done your research, huh? His knees nearly buckled. Turan took a step closer, lowering her voice just slightly. I built this company from the ground up, she said. I hired the best managers, trained employees, worked my way into high-end markets, and guess what? She tilted her head, her smirk turning almost pitying. I didn't have to dress like money to do it. The humiliation burned in the employee's face. He felt hot, suffocated. The weight of his own assumptions, of his own arrogance, crushed him all at once. Turan finally exhaled, her amusement fading just a little. I was going to let it go, she admitted. I was just here to check up on operations. But you. She shook her head, mock disappointment in her tone. You made it real easy for me to make a decision. The employee froze. Turan turned to the officers. Get him out of here. The words hit like a final verdict. The employee choked. Wait, what? No, please. The officers didn't hesitate. They stepped forward, firm, but professional, guiding him toward the exit. Please. I didn't know. Please give me a second chance. Turan watched him with a calmness that made it clear this was already over. Should have thought about that before you treated me like nothing, she said simply. And just like that, he was gone. The glass doors swung shut behind him, sealing his fate. The boutique was silent now, except for the lingering echo of the moment. A moment he would replay in his mind forever. Turan exhaled slowly, the weight of the encounter settling over her shoulders. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even surprised. She had seen this before. 1,000 times. In 1,000 different ways. A man who thought he held power simply because he worked in proximity to wealth. A man who looked at her, sized her up, and assumed she was less. And now, he was on the other side of the glass. Captain Richards shifted beside her. Would you like to press formal charges? The question hung in the air for a moment. Turan glanced toward the door, where the former employee was still standing outside, shaking, barely processing what had just happened. He was ruined, and he knew it, not because of some criminal act, but because of his own arrogance. Turan took a deep breath. No. The officers exchanged a look. The second officer, the woman with neatly tied-back hair, raised a brow. You sure? Turan nodded. He did this to himself. That's punishment enough. Captain Richards didn't argue. He understood. Instead, he stepped back and gave a small nod. If you need anything else, let us know. Turan turned, offering him a grateful look. I appreciate it. With that, the officers gave one final glance around the store before heading for the exit. As they left, the remaining employees, the ones who had witnessed the entire thing, stood frozen. They hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. They had just watched. Now, every single one of them was staring at her. She let the silence linger, stretching the moment. Then she turned toward the counter. The manager, an older woman who had been in the back when everything had gone down, had finally stepped forward. She had an uneasy look on her face, as if she wasn't sure what was supposed to happen next. Turan met her gaze. How long have you worked here? The woman hesitated, then cleared her throat. 7 years. Turan nodded, thoughtful. And how often do things like this happen? The woman flinched. Turan didn't need an answer. She already knew. This wasn't the first time an employee had treated someone like less. It wouldn't be the last. This wasn't about one man's mistake. It was about a culture of people deciding who mattered based on appearances, a culture of employees assuming who belonged based on assumptions, not facts. Turan had built this company to be different. She had started Valenka with the belief that luxury wasn't about exclusion. It was about experience. And yet, even her own stores had fallen victim to the same toxic elitism that she had fought against for years. That wasn't something she could ignore. She exhaled through her nose, then looked at the manager again. I need a meeting with the entire team. The woman swallowed hard. Right now? Turan nodded. Right now. The woman scrambled to gather everyone. Employees trickled in from the stockroom. Others set down what they were doing. Within minutes, the boutique staff, the people who represented her brand, stood before her. Turan let her gaze drift across them. Some wouldn't even meet her eyes. Others stood stiffly, waiting, nervous. They should be nervous. Turan crossed her arms. Does anyone want to tell me why this happened today? No one spoke. Turan let the silence stretch. She had learned a long time ago that silence made people uncomfortable. And in discomfort, the truth always bubbled to the surface. Finally, a younger woman near the back shifted. She was fidgeting, her fingers ringing together. Then finally she spoke. I don't think it's just him. The air in the room changed. Taran's eyes narrowed slightly. Go on. The young woman, maybe in her mid-20s with bright, nervous eyes, took a breath. I've been here for about a year, she admitted. And I've seen this happen before. Murmurs rippled through the group. Taran tilted her head. How often? The young woman hesitated, then quieter. All the time. More murmurs. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else shifted awkwardly. Taran inhaled deeply. And no one thought to say anything? Silence. A male employee near the front finally cleared his throat. We just thought that's how things were. It's not like management ever. He stopped himself. Taran's lips pressed together. Management ever what? The man swallowed. He knew he had already said too much, but now he had no choice but to finish. It's not like management ever said anything against it. A long, heavy pause. Taran exhaled slowly. And there it was. She had built this brand with one mission: to change how people experience luxury. But here, in one of her own stores, that mission had been ignored. It didn't matter that she wasn't on the floor every day. It didn't matter that she hadn't been physically present to enforce the culture she wanted. She had allowed this to happen. And that meant it was her responsibility to fix it. She straightened. All right, she said, her voice sharp, commanding, effective. Effective immediately. We're making some changes. Some of the employees tensed. Taran turned to the manager. Every single employee will undergo mandatory customer experience training. No exceptions. If anyone refuses, they can leave. A few of them blanched. She turned back to the group. Second, she continued, we will be implementing a new anonymous feedback system. Any employee who witnesses discrimination will be able to report it directly to me. More whispers. Taran's expression hardened. If you're uncomfortable with that, you're free to find another job. Silence. No one moved. No one left. Good. Taran let a beat pass, then exhaled. I built this company to be different, she said. To create something that didn't just cater to the wealthy, but to everyone. If you can't respect that vision, you don't belong here. A few employees nodded. Some visibly relaxed. Others simply stared, still absorbing everything. Taran held their gaze. This is your warning, she finished. Next time, there won't be one. She turned on her heel and walked toward the back office, leaving the team to sit with the weight of her words. Because the truth was simple. She didn't just fire one man today. She set a new standard. And now they had a choice. Either they rose to it, or they didn't belong. Taran sat in the back office, her fingers pressed against her temples as she let out a slow breath. The tension in her shoulders had started to settle, but the weight of everything still lingered. Today had been necessary, but it had also been exhausting. She glanced at the security feed on the screen in front of her, watching as the employees slowly dispersed. Some were speaking in hushed whispers, others moving quickly, as if afraid they'd be the next to be called out. Good. Let them feel it. She leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet of the office wash over her. She wasn't the kind of boss who needed to micromanage every single thing. But she had built this company from nothing, and she refused to let it become another sterile, elitist brand that treated people like dirt. There was a soft knock on the door. She sighed, already knowing who it was before she even looked up. Come in. The manager stepped inside, her movements hesitant. She had been running this location for years, but today, for the first time, she looked unsure of herself. Taran studied her for a moment before gesturing to the chair across from her. Sit. The woman obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. She took a deep breath. Ms. Brooks, I just wanted to say, I had no idea that. Taran held up a hand, cutting her off. Stop. The woman froze. Taran's gaze was sharp. You did know. A flicker of something crossed the manager's face, guilt. You knew, Taran repeated, her voice calm but unyielding. You may not have said the words yourself, but you saw what was happening in this store, and you let it slide. The woman lowered her head. Taran exhaled. I'm not looking for an apology, she continued. I'm looking for accountability. The manager swallowed hard. I understand. Do you? The woman met her eyes. I do now. Taran studied her for a long moment, searching for any sign of defensiveness, of an excuse waiting to be blurted out. But there was none. For the first time that day, the manager looked genuinely humbled. Taran tapped her fingers against the desk. This store is under your leadership, she said. That means every single thing that happens here, good or bad, is a reflection of you. The woman nodded. I know. Then tell me what you're going to do about it. The manager took a deep breath. I'll personally oversee the new training, make sure every employee understands that this store is for everyone, not just the people who look like they belong. She swallowed. And I'll start hiring based on more than just appearance. Turan leaned back. Good. A beat of silence passed before the woman hesitated again. And if I'm being honest, I'd like to go through the training myself. Turan raised a brow that she hadn't expected. The woman exhaled. I never realized how much I'd let slide. I should have done more. Turan studied her again, but this time, there was no doubt in her mind. The woman meant it. Finally, she nodded. All right. Relief flickered across the manager's face. Turan sighed, rolling her shoulders. You've got work to do. I expect a full report in a week. Go. The woman stood, nodding firmly. Thank you. Turan waved her off, watching as she left the office. She didn't fully trust her yet, but at least now, she knew she was listening. The next morning, Turan walked into the store unannounced. It was still early, before most of the employees arrived. But she wasn't there to check on them, not yet. Instead, she went straight to the counter, running her fingers along the smooth glass surface. The same glass the employee from yesterday had leaned against, smirking, thinking he had her all figured out. She wondered where he was now. Still standing outside, still trying to make sense of what happened? Or had he already started looking for another job, still carrying that same mindset? Not her problem. She hoped he learned something from it. But if he didn't, that was on him. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Excuse me, Mississippi. Can I help you? Turan turned and was surprised to see the young woman from yesterday. The one who had spoken up, the one who had told the truth even when no one else would. The woman blinked, recognizing her now. Oh, Miss Brooks. Turan smiled. You can call me Turan. The woman hesitated, then smiled back. Turan. There was a beat of silence before Turan nodded toward the store. You're still here. The young woman straightened. Yes, ma'am. You didn't quit? She shook her head. No. Turan watched her. Why not? The woman took a breath. Because I think things are going to change now. Turan studied her for a long moment, then finally she nodded. I think so too. A comfortable silence settled between them before Turan finally glanced toward the luxury handbags displayed on the far wall. I need a new bag, she mused. The young woman smirked. I think we can make that happen. Turan chuckled. Good. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Not just for the store. Not just for the company. But for the future of the industry itself.